On December 29, 1944, in the frozen killing fields of Belgium, a man noticed something that should not have been there. A single tree, standing where no tree had stood the day before. That observation, made across 1,600 meters of snow-covered ground, would prevent the deaths of 150 American soldiers. The man who saw it had never been trained as a scout. He had never attended a specialized reconnaissance school. What he possessed was something the army could not teach, something born not from military doctrine but from hunger. This is the story of how poverty, subsistence, and the desperate need to survive in the mountains of Virginia gave one man the ability to see what everyone else missed, and how that ability, on one frozen morning, changed everything. Clinchco, Virginia, was not a place where anyone expected to raise heroes. It was a place where people survived if they were lucky and disappeared if they were not. The town sat wedged into the southwestern corner of the state, pressed between mountains that rose like the walls of a prison. The coal came out of those mountains in the 1920s and 30s, and with it came the company towns, the script instead of money, and the understanding that your life belonged to someone else. By the time Daryl Eugene Powers was born in 1923, Clinchco was already dying. The seams were playing out. The money was gone. What remained were families who had nowhere else to go and nothing else to do but wait. Daryl was the third of 5 children. His father worked when there was work, which was rarely. His mother kept a garden that produced more hope than food. The house they lived in was not really a house. It was a structure. 4 walls, a roof that leaked, a stove that burned whatever could be found. In winter, the children slept together under every blanket and coat the family owned. In summer, they slept on the porch to escape the heat that turned the inside into an oven. There was no electricity until Daryl was 9. There was no running water until he was 12. The outhouse was 40 feet from the back door, and in January, that walk felt like a mile. Hunger was the constant, not the kind of hunger that makes you irritable before dinner, the kind that wakes you in the night, the kind that makes you chew pine resin to trick your stomach into thinking it has received something, the kind that turns every waking moment into a calculation of calories and availability. The Powers family ate what they could grow, what they could trade, and what they could kill. Daryl learned to hunt because he had to. There was no other option. If he did not bring back squirrels, rabbits, or the occasional turkey, his younger siblings went to bed with nothing. His father gave him a single-shot .22 rifle when he was 7 years old. It was not a gift. It was a tool, an investment. The rifle was older than Daryl, and it had belonged to his grandfather. The stock was cracked and wrapped with wire. The sight was bent, but it fired, and that was all that mattered. His father gave him 10 rounds of ammunition and told him to make them count. If he missed, he did not eat. If he missed too often, no one ate. That was the education. There were no practice shots, no casual afternoons plinking cans. Every pull of the trigger had to mean something. Daryl learned fast. He had no choice. He learned to move through the forest without sound. He learned to control his breathing. He learned to wait. Most of all, he learned to see, not just to look but to see, to understand the woods as a living map, to memorize the placement of every stone, every fallen branch, every tree, to know when something had changed. The squirrels he hunted were small, fast, and almost invisible against the bark. They did not sit still. They did not wait to be shot. If you saw a squirrel moving, you had already lost it. The only way to kill one was to know where it would be before it got there, to see the landscape so clearly that anything out of place, anything that had moved or appeared, became obvious. He would leave the house before dawn and walk into the mountains. He carried the rifle and 3 or 4 rounds, sometimes less. He would choose a section of forest and study it. He would sit for an hour, sometimes 2, simply looking, mapping the terrain in his mind, the oak with the broken branch, the stone shaped like a turtle, the rotted stump with the hollow center. He would close his eyes and rebuild the scene from memory. Then he would open them and see what he had missed. He did this every day. Not because he wanted to, because he had to. The skill he developed was not marksmanship, though he became an excellent shot. It was pattern recognition. It was the ability to hold an image of the world in his mind and compare it instantly to what his eyes were seeing, to detect variance, to notice when a branch had moved, when a shadow had changed, when something that should not be there had arrived. It was a skill born from deprivation, from the understanding that missing a shot meant his sister went hungry. That failure had a cost. And that cost was not abstract. He killed his first squirrel at 7. By the time he was 10, he rarely missed. By 12, he was bringing home more game than his father. He graduated from squirrels to rabbits, from rabbits to turkeys, from turkeys to deer. He learned to track, to read sign, to move through the woods as though he were part of them. But the core skill never changed. It was always about seeing, about knowing what belonged and what did not, about holding the world in his memory and noticing when it had been altered, even slightly. When he was 14, his father got him a job at the sawmill. When he was 16, the sawmill closed and he went to work at a machine shop in Grundy, 15 miles away. He walked to work. He walked home. The machine shop made parts for coal equipment, gaskets, fittings, small precision components. Daryl worked a lathe. The lathe required absolute attention. A thousandth of an inch mattered. If you were not paying attention, you ruined the part. If you ruined too many parts, you were fired. There was no margin for error. The work taught him a different kind of focus, the kind that sustained over hours, the kind that demanded perfection not once but repeatedly every single day. He was 19 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He did not enlist immediately. His family needed the income. His father was sick, his lungs destroyed by coal dust. Daryl was the primary earner. But by the summer of 1942, the draft was inevitable. He decided to choose his path rather than have it chosen for him. He enlisted in the army in August of 1942. He told his mother he would send money home. He told his father he would be back. He did not tell them he was terrified. Basic training was at Fort Benning, Georgia. It was the first time Daryl had ever left Virginia. The Army gave him boots that fit, meals 3 times a day, and a bed with a mattress. It felt like luxury. The training itself was not difficult. He could shoot better than the instructors. He could move through the woods without being seen. He could read terrain faster than anyone in his platoon. What surprised him was how few of the other men could do any of those things. Most of them had grown up in cities. They had never fired a rifle. They had never spent a night outside. They walked through the forest like they were walking through a department store, oblivious to everything around them. Daryl did not stand out because he tried to. He stood out because the things the Army was trying to teach him were things he had been doing since childhood. His instructors noticed. They asked him questions. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Where did you learn to move like that? He told them the truth. He learned because he had to, because his family would have starved otherwise. They did not understand. They thought he was being modest. He was not. He was being literal. In January of 1943, he was selected for airborne training. He had not asked for it. He had not even known what it was. The Army decided he had the temperament and the skills. He was sent to Fort Benning's parachute school. He learned to jump out of airplanes. He learned to land without breaking his legs. He learned to fight with minimal supplies behind enemy lines with no support. The training was brutal. Men quit every day. Daryl did not quit. Not because he was braver than the others, but because quitting meant going home with nothing. And nothing was what he had left. He was assigned to the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 2nd Battalion, Easy Company. The 506th was part of the 101st Airborne Division. They told him he was in an elite unit. They told him he would be dropped into Europe ahead of the invasion. They told him he would be expected to fight outnumbered, surrounded, and without resupply. They did not tell him that most of the men in his unit would be dead or wounded within a year. They did not have to. He already knew. He shipped out to England in February of 1944. For 4 months he trained in the English countryside. The hedgerows of Normandy, they were told, would be the worst fighting of the war. Close combat, no room to maneuver, no visibility, every field a fortress, every hedgerow a trench. Daryl listened. He studied the maps. He tried to imagine what it would be like. He could not. No one could. On the night of June 5, 1944, he boarded a C-47 transport plane and flew toward France. The jump was chaos, planes scattered, men dropped miles from their objectives, equipment was lost, units were fragmented. Daryl landed in a field and spent the first 3 hours of D-Day trying to find anyone from his company. He found 4 men. None of them were officers. They moved toward the sound of gunfire and eventually linked up with a larger group. For the next 6 weeks, he fought in the Hedgerows. The Hedgerows were worse than anything they had been told, worse than anything that could be described. Each field was surrounded by a wall of earth and roots and vegetation 10 feet high and 5 feet thick. The Germans were on the other side. You could not see them. You could not flank them. You could only go forward straight into their fire and hope you lived long enough to kill them first. The fighting was intimate and vicious. Grenades over the hedgerow, rifles at 10 feet, bayonets when the ammunition ran out. Daryl killed men whose faces he could see. He killed men who were so close he could hear them crying for their mothers. He did not think about it. There was no time to think. What kept him alive was the same skill that had kept him fed as a child. He noticed things. He saw the hedgerow that had been disturbed, the bush that had been moved, the shadow that should not exist. He killed men because he saw them before they saw him. It was not heroism. It was pattern recognition. It was the woods of Virginia transposed onto the fields of France. It was survival. By August, the 506th had fought its way off the beaches and into the interior. The unit was pulled back to England to rest and refit. Daryl had been promoted to corporal. Half the men he had jumped with were dead. The rest were wounded or missing. They brought in replacements, boys who had never seen combat, boys who did not know how to be quiet, who did not know how to see. Daryl tried to teach them. Some learned. Most did not live long enough. In September, the 506th jumped into Holland as part of Operation Market Garden. The operation was supposed to end the war by Christmas. It failed. Daryl spent 3 weeks fighting in Eindhoven and the surrounding area. The combat was different. Urban, streets instead of hedgerows, buildings instead of fields, but the principle was the same. See first, shoot first, live. By November, the 506th was back in France. They were told they would rest. They were told the war was almost over. The Germans were finished, they said. It was only a matter of time. Then on December 16, 1944, the Germans launched the largest offensive of the war. The attack came through the Ardennes forest in Belgium. It was the middle of winter. The weather was the worst in decades. Snow, ice, fog so thick you could not see 10 feet. The German plan was to split the Allied line, capture the port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. The plan nearly worked. The 101st Airborne Division was rushed to the town of Bastogne, Belgium. Bastogne sat at the intersection of 7 roads. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the region. The Germans needed it. The Americans could not afford to lose it. The 506th arrived on December 19th. By December 21st, the town was surrounded. There was no resupply, no reinforcements, no way out. The temperature dropped to 10 degrees below zero. The men had summer uniforms. They had no winter coats, no gloves, no insulated boots. They dug foxholes in the frozen ground and waited. Daryl Powers, now a staff sergeant, was positioned on the northern edge of the perimeter. His squad held a section of forest that overlooked a small valley. The valley was open ground. Anyone crossing it would be exposed. The Germans knew this. They did not cross during the day, but at night they probed, they tested, they tried to find weak points. Daryl's squad repelled 3 attacks in the first 5 days. Each attack cost lives. Each attack left fewer men to hold the line. The cold was worse than the Germans. Men froze to death in their foxholes. Frostbite was universal. Feet swelled inside boots until the boots had to be cut off. Hands stopped working. Rifles froze. Ammunition froze. The wounded died not from their wounds but from exposure. There was no heat. No fires. Fires drew artillery. The men huddled together and tried not to fall asleep because falling asleep meant freezing to death. Daryl stayed awake by moving. Every hour he would crawl out of his foxhole and move along the line. He would check the men. He would check the field of fire. He would check the landscape. It was during one of these checks on the morning of December 29th that he saw it. The tree. It was approximately 1,600 meters away at the far edge of the valley, a tall tree, a conifer. It stood alone, slightly apart from the tree line. Daryl had been looking at that valley for 10 days. He had memorized every feature, every tree, every stone, every shadow. That tree had not been there the day before, he was certain. He stared at it. He closed his eyes and rebuilt the landscape in his mind. He opened them and looked again. The tree was wrong. It did not belong. He called over his squad leader, a sergeant from Pennsylvania named Hoskins. He pointed at the tree. Hoskins looked. He did not see anything unusual. Daryl explained. That tree was not there yesterday. Hoskins asked if he was sure. Daryl said he was sure. Hoskins asked how he could be sure. Daryl told him the same way he was sure about anything, because he had looked at that spot every day for 10 days and there had been no tree. Hoskins trusted him. Hoskins had seen Daryl spot German positions that no one else could see. Hoskins reported it to the company commander. The company commander sent 2 men with binoculars to observe the tree. They watched for 2 hours. They saw nothing, no movement, no sign of activity, but the tree was in the wrong place. It did not match the surrounding vegetation. It was too perfect, too symmetrical. The company commander reported it up the chain. By mid-afternoon, an artillery observer had been sent forward. The observer studied the tree through a spotting scope. He agreed. The tree was wrong. At 1600 hours, an artillery strike was called. 3 guns, 12 rounds, high explosive. The rounds impacted directly on target. The tree disintegrated. So did the German 88mm anti-aircraft gun that had been hidden inside it. The 88 was one of the most effective weapons of the war. It could destroy tanks at 2,000 meters. It could kill infantry at 3,000 meters. It could fire 20 rounds per minute. The Germans had camouflaged it inside a wooden frame covered with branches and netting. From a distance, it looked like a tree. From above, it looked like part of the forest. It had been positioned to fire directly into the American lines. The crew had been waiting for the order to open fire. If they had, they would have killed dozens of men in the first minute, over 100 in the first hour. The artillery strike killed the entire gun crew, 7 men. It destroyed the gun. It eliminated the threat. Intelligence officers arrived the next day to assess the site. They found the remains of the weapon, the bodies of the crew, and the prepared ammunition. Over 200 rounds, enough to sustain fire for more than 10 minutes. They calculated the likely casualties if the gun had fired. The estimate was 150 killed or wounded, possibly more. Daryl Powers received no medal for this action. There was no ceremony, no commendation. His company commander thanked him. His squad bought him an extra cigarette ration. That was all. The war did not stop for individual achievements. There were too many battles, too many men, too many moments that mattered. What Daryl had done was noted in a report and forgotten. But the men who did not die remembered. They did not know why the artillery had fired. They did not know about the tree, but they were alive. 150 men who should have been killed went on to fight at Bastogne, went on to survive the war, went on to return home. They had children. Those children had children. The ripple of that single observation, made across 1,600 meters of frozen ground, extended forward through generations. Daryl Powers did not think of it that way. He had seen something that did not belong. He had reported it. That was all. It was what he had always done. It was what he had been taught to do, not by the army but by hunger, by the desperate need to see clearly because clarity meant survival. The skill that saved 150 lives had been forged in poverty, in the mountains of Virginia, in the endless need to bring home a squirrel or go to bed with nothing. Bastogne held. On December 26, General Patton's Third Army broke through the German lines and relieved the town. The siege was over. The 101st Airborne had held against overwhelming odds. The German offensive collapsed. By January, the war had turned again. The Germans retreated. The Allies advanced. The end was in sight. Daryl fought through the winter and into the spring. In March of 1945, his unit was sent into Germany. The fighting was sporadic. Some towns surrendered without resistance. Others fought to the last man. On April 9th, Daryl was involved in a close-quarters engagement in a small town whose name he never learned. A German sniper had pinned down his platoon from a church tower. Daryl spotted the position, moved into a flanking building, and killed the sniper with a single shot at 200 meters. The shot went through a 6-inch gap in the shutters. It was the kind of shot most men could not make on a range, let alone in combat. Daryl made it because he had been making shots like that since he was 7 years old. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. Daryl was in Austria. He had been in combat for 11 months. He had jumped out of airplanes 3 times. He had been shot at thousands of times. He had killed more men than he could count. He had watched friends die. He had survived. When the order came to stand down, he felt nothing. No relief, no joy, just a kind of hollow exhaustion. He returned to the United States in July of 1945. He was discharged in August. He went home to Clinchco. His father had died while he was overseas. His mother was living with his sister. The house he had grown up in was abandoned. He stayed for 2 weeks, then left. There was nothing there for him. The town was deader than when he had left. The mines were closed. The people were gone. He moved to Roanoke, Virginia. He got a job in a machine shop. He married a woman named Helen in 1947. They had 3 children. He worked the lathe for 30 years. He never talked about the war, not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone. When people asked, he said he had been in the army. When they pressed, he said he had been in Europe. That was all. He did not go to reunions. He did not join veteran organizations. He did not apply for medals he might have been entitled to. He simply lived. He went to work. He came home. He provided for his family. He disappeared into normalcy. He died in 1993 at the age of 70. The obituary in the Roanoke Times said he had served in World War II. It did not mention the 506th. It did not mention Normandy or Bastogne. It did not mention the tree that was not there. His children did not know. His grandchildren did not know. The story was lost, filed away in a military archive that no one would ever read. But the men who lived because of him did not disappear. They went on. They built lives. They raised families. They became teachers, engineers, farmers, shopkeepers. They became fathers and grandfathers. They passed on something, even if they did not know what it was. The world continued because Daryl Powers had looked at a valley on a frozen morning and noticed that a tree had appeared where no tree should be. The skill that saved them was not taught in any manual. It was not the result of advanced training or technological superiority. It was the result of poverty, of hunger, of a childhood spent memorizing forests because missing a squirrel meant going hungry. It was the ability to see the world clearly, to hold it in memory, and to notice when something had changed. It was a skill born from deprivation and honed by necessity. And on one morning in December of 1944, it altered the course of 150 lives. No one remembers Daryl Powers. There are no statues, no plaques, no memorials. His name does not appear in the histories of the Battle of the Bulge. But the men who did not die that day because an artillery strike destroyed a camouflaged gun they never saw, they lived. And their children lived. And their children's children. The calculation is simple. 1 observation, 1 man, 150 lives, and all the lives that followed. The war is full of stories like this. Moments that mattered, decisions that saved hundreds, actions that changed everything. Most of them are forgotten. The men who performed them did not seek recognition. They did not think they had done anything extraordinary. They had simply done what needed to be done. They had seen what needed to be seen. They had acted when action was required. And then they went home and disappeared into the quiet anonymity of ordinary life. Daryl Powers was one of those men. He saw a tree that should not have been there. He reported it. The tree was destroyed. 150 men lived. That is the story. That is all of it. A man from the mountains of Virginia, trained by poverty and hunger, who noticed a single detail that everyone else had missed. And because he noticed, the world continued. Because he saw clearly, others survived. Because he had spent his childhood learning to see what did not belong, he saved lives without ever firing a shot. The tree that was not there. That is what mattered, not the heroism, not the bravery, not the sacrifice, the noticing. The ability to hold the world in your mind and see when it has changed. The ability to detect variance, to recognize threat, to understand instantly and without doubt that something is wrong. That ability saved 150 lives. And that ability was not born in a military training camp. It was born in hunger, in the mountains. In the endless need to see clearly, because clarity was the difference between eating and starving. We do not remember men like Daryl Powers. We do not build monuments to observation. We do not celebrate the quiet skills that prevent disaster rather than responding to it. We remember the charges, the battles, the dramatic moments. We forget the man who saw a tree and saved 100 lives. We forget because the story is too simple, too ordinary, too unheroic. A man noticed something. He said something. That was all, but that was everything. This is the story of Daryl Powers. A man who grew up in poverty, who learned to see the world clearly because his survival depended on it, who went to war and used that skill to save lives, and who came home and disappeared into the quiet current of an ordinary life. No one remembers him, but the men who lived because of him, they had lives. They had families. They had futures. And all of it, every moment of it, existed because one man looked at a valley and saw a tree that should not have been there. If you found this story powerful, if it made you think about the hidden skills that shape history, I would be grateful if you would subscribe to this channel. Share this story with others who appreciate the quiet heroism of observation and attention. Leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever noticed a single detail that changed an outcome? Do you know someone in your family who served, whose story was never told? What skills do you carry that were born not from training but from necessity? These stories matter. These moments matter. Men like Daryl Powers matter. And the only way we remember them is if we tell their stories. Thank you for listening.